and propagate in a weightless environment. Samantha is working on tissue chips, understanding how pharmaceuticals work on human cells in the weightless environment. We study fluid dynamics and fundamental physics and basic science. It turns out that we, the astronauts, the crew, are actually the subject of much of the science as well. Biomedical research to understand. Thank you, Secretary Wilson, for those kind words, kind introduction, and his emphasis on science and science education, I agree with 100%. And I put my life on it. When we sat at the top of that rocket, we had 100% faith that that capsule, that rocket, was going to take us to the space station and bring us home safely. So that is the trust that we have in the scientific method, and in the engineers that built the machines that carried us to space. I am absolutely delighted to be here this morning, and so grateful that you all are here too, taking advantage of this incredible event that the museum is putting on, Astronomy Days. It is just the number of scientists and exhibitors and kiosks that are out there with people that are excited and enthusiastic to share with you what they know about things that the museum has exhibits for every day. They're talking about astronomy and physics, our solar system, our sun. I hope that you take advantage of this opportunity. And I'm grateful that you're here now so that I can share with you a little bit of my experience. I'm also really excited to be here because, according to all rule and reason, the fact that I would be up here sharing the experience of living and working in space is actually something of an impossibility. It's really impossible that I should be up here on stage right now. And it's not just because becoming an astronaut is very challenging and the odds are, pardon the pun, astronomical. But it's because in the pursuit of this goal to become an astronaut, I joined the Air Force. I was in pilot training. And then about a third of the way through our first training aircraft, I was medically disqualified and medically discharged from the Air Force. I was kicked out of the Air Force. So I don't know about you, but in my mind, there's no line that connects being medically discharged from the Air Force to becoming an astronaut. So that's why I say that it feels somewhat impossible that I had this opportunity, this privilege of being able to talk with you this morning. As Secretary Wilson mentioned, I've wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I can remember. I was inspired, I think, by science fiction, books and movies. My favorite book when I was young was Runaway Robot. It was a story about this young boy who had a robot friend, and they had adventures on Ganymede. I'm a big Star Wars nerd, and so I think those things just fueled my imagination and this dream of getting to live and work in space. But it wasn't until second grade, Mrs. Loudon wheeled a television into our classroom, and I had the opportunity to watch our very first space shuttle launch, April 12, 1981. And that is when this dream really captured my imagination, because it was at that point that I realized that it wasn't science fiction, it was science fact. It was a reality that we had people living and working in space. And so I really then latched on to this dream and tried to chart a path for myself to having that opportunity of getting to fly in space. Now, there's no internet when I was growing up, and so I read books. I read stories of our early space program, biographies and autobiographies written by our early astronauts. And all of those astronauts were pilots and test pilots, and so I decided that's the path I needed to follow. I grew up in an Air Force family. And so I decided I want to join the Air Force to become a pilot. And if I'm going to join the Air Force, I want to go to the Air Force Academy. And so I remember very clearly, I found a little postcard in one of my dad's Air Force magazines, and I filled it out and I checked, yes, I would like to learn more about the U.S. Air Force Academy. I sent that off with great anticipation and never heard back from them. And it may have been because we were living in England at the time, but it was probably because I was 11. I didn't let that deter me, and so I worked hard. I graduated from high school in Northern Virginia with the great privilege of receiving an appointment to the class of 1995 at the Air Force Academy. I worked hard there and did well enough to secure a pilot training slot. After graduation, I went off to do a master's degree, but followed that with pilot training, and I remember very clearly my first days at Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma. Continuing along that path that I had charted out for myself, pursuing that dream of becoming a pilot for the Air Force, and someday maybe becoming an astronaut. So about a third of the way through our first aircraft, the T-37, I was doing well academically. I was at the top of my class, both academically and in flying. Then I went to the flight surgeon with what I thought was a cold. He hemmed and hawed a little bit, he tapped his chin. He said, I think there might be something else going on here. We need you to do some more testing. And so I was pulled out of the cockpit while I went through further diagnostic testing, both there in Oklahoma and then down in Texas. Now, during that time, I had 100% confidence that I would get back to flying because I didn't really feel like I had any symptoms. But knowing that the Air Force is a large organization and not really having the individual interests of its members at heart, I decided I ought to have maybe an alternative. And so I started taking night classes, studying for medical school entrance exams, and I started applying to medical school so that if for some reason the Air Force decided that I wasn't going to fly anymore, I could at least present that I had an alternative path, a different way that I can serve the Air Force. After about 6 months, the medical evaluation board convened, and to my great surprise, not only was I not going to be allowed to continue flying, but I was going to be discharged from the Air Force. And so I appealed that decision because I felt a deep obligation to the Air Force team to make us successful in low Earth orbit. This team, represented by trainers, engineers, instructors, our flight controllers, our flight directors, all investing in us as we prepare for our mission to the space station. We spend time at Johnson Space Center with our international partners, and a lot of time at Hawthorne SpaceX to prepare for this mission. Right up until about a week prior to our launch, we make our way out to Kennedy Space Center to start our hard quarantine and our preparations for our mission to the International Space Station.
Crew 4 astronauts getting their spacesuits on, set to launch to the International Space Station. This is a live look inside that suit-up room where the crew of 3 Americans and 1 European astronaut are completing their checkouts. There they are. The astronauts are getting ready to go to space, taking their first step outside. From left to right, Jessica Watkins, Bob Hine, N.Lindgren,
What an amazing opportunity, walking out of that very historic operations and checkout building, waving one last farewell to our family and friends before we could get into the vehicle with a police escort taking us out in the dead of night, seeing our vehicle highlighted in xenon lights, standing there poised to take us to lower orbit. Riding the elevator, crossing the gantry, getting strapped into our rocket, ready for our flight to lower orbit.
Threshold of this amazing opportunity to launch to the International Space Station.
absolutely spectacular view for our family and friends watching this rocket claw its way into space. And of course, even more spectacular to be on the rocket.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Crew Dragon Freedom. We enjoyed showing you around our home for the next few hours, and we're looking forward to docking with the space station and sharing more of our work and the amazing science and research that we had the opportunity to do with you over the coming months. So thanks so much, and Crew Dragon Freedom signing off.
So absolutely amazing that we went from the ground to low Earth orbit in just 8.5 minutes. 8.5 minutes to go from 0 miles per hour to 17,500 miles per hour. And then for our crew, another 17 hours to catch up with the space station to dock to greet our friends and crewmates.
The International Space Station Flight 200
is an incredible science platform. Most labs on here on the Earth are committed to one type of science, and on the space station we are able to perform science across an incredible spectrum. We do material science. There was a video of a farmer building a fiber optic cable there. Here, Wadi is working in our combustion chamber as we study how flames ignite and propagate in the weightless environment. Samantha is working on tissue chips, understanding how pharmaceuticals work on human cells in the weightless environment. We study fluid dynamics and fundamental physics and basic science. It turns out that we, the astronauts, the crew, are actually the subject of much of the science as well. Biomedical research to understand how the human body is affected and changes and adapts to this weightless environment. To better understand the challenges that we face as we go onto the moon, and in the future, we go to Mars. Here, Wadi is studying immune cells. It turns out that the immune function off in space. During the second mission, we grew plants using aeroponics and hydroponics, a technology that allows scalability, so that someday I could imagine a greenhouse module completely full of green plants, an amazing place to visit, a resource to supplement our food system, and potentially to scrub carbon dioxide and provide oxygen for our crew. You saw me drawing blood. We take those samples. Many of them we will put into our -80-degree freezer in preparation to be taken back down to the Earth in a cargo vehicle. Speaking of cargo vehicles, we had a number of spacecraft visit the space station during our mission. On the far left, a Cygnus cargo vehicle and an Antares rocket. In the middle, the Russian Progress. And on the far right, a SpaceX Cargo Dragon. So let's talk about the Cargo Dragon first. So this is a vehicle that will launch and fly and autonomously dock to the space station itself. And once it arrives, it represents an incredibly busy time for the crew as we unpack all the equipment, food, and research and find a specific place for it in the space station. After this very intensive hard work, we don't move quite that fast. We enjoy the fruits of our labor. And then, for this particular vehicle, we will load the SpaceX Cargo Dragon up with failed equipment. This is a broken spacesuit. We will load it up with failed equipment, as well as many of those samples, the scientific and research samples that we have collected. And this vehicle will return to the Earth under a parachute, land in the ocean, and be retrieved by the SpaceX recovery boat. All the contents will be distributed. The engineering pieces will be sent to labs to be fixed, and all of those biological samples and research samples will be distributed around the world for further research. So in addition to the SpaceX Cargo Dragon, we also have the Cygnus cargo vehicle. And instead of docking with the space station, it will actually come up and fly next to the space station